I'll be the one by your side through the good and the hard.
I start the story in 1982 because at that time I began having this recurring dream for a whole year. And that wasn't every night, but I was 29 years old at the time. And at that time, my brother, of course, was still alive. And I do have a sister who's 10 years older. My brother was 4 years younger than me. I'm the oldest. But as I said, I started having this recurring dream in 1982. And it was always the same. I was outside on these wide, expansive fields, and a large crowd of people had gathered there. And someone near me asked what was happening. And I replied that I heard it was the end of the world. And in that moment, everyone looked up at the sky, and there was Jesus. And in that moment, when that happened in my dream, I doubled over, almost falling down to the ground. And I was experiencing just the worst pain I had ever known in my life. But it wasn't physical pain I was experiencing. It was heartfelt suffering and agony beyond words. And as I doubled over in this dream, I just kept saying, but it isn't supposed to be this way. I thought that the end of the world was supposed to be joyous. And then the dream would end suddenly. So I had no idea what this dream meant. But fast forward to the morning of Friday, October the 7th, 1983. And that morning I was driving my husband to a meeting. And as I was driving, I suddenly got this very sharp pain in my chest around my heart area. And I remember glancing at the car clock to determine how much time we had. And it said 9 o'clock. And I didn't say anything to my husband about what I was experiencing, but I had a lot of fear and alarm about that because I just kept thinking to myself, am I on my way to a heart attack? Do I have a blood clot? I didn't know, but as I continued driving, eventually the pain faded away, but I couldn't forget about it. And so at that point, I dropped my husband off at his office, and I proceeded on down toward downtown Houston because I was heading off for the Greek festival that's held down there every year. And I was meeting up with a group of friends. And my husband, Michael, was coming with some other friends to join us later down there. But sooner than I expected, I spotted Michael after a while coming through this crowd and just making his way through the throngs of people in this annex area where we were waiting to have lunch. And I smiled at him, and then when he got closer to me, I saw his face, and I knew that something was very wrong. I had never seen him look like that. And as he finally made his way to me, he put his hands on my arms and looked me straight in the eyes. And he said, Donnie was killed this morning in an accident. Donnie, of course, being my younger brother. And his face just crumpled when he spoke those words to me. And when he told me this, I had this vision of the earth just in front of me, falling, and just crashing at my feet. And I just slumped down to the ground in the middle of this whole crowd and everything, and just, I was screaming, no, no, no. And so my brother's fatal accident happened while he was driving his company truck, and his time of death was reported as 9 a.m. And this was the exact time that I had experienced that this terrible pain in my heart area that morning. And that day, I understood what this recurring dream was trying to tell me. It was showing me the setting where I was in the Greek festival with a lot of people around. And it was showing me my emotional reaction to the news of his death. From my book, I describe how I felt. Every moment was just sheer agony during those days, with no words to adequately describe a broken heart. Nothing made sense, and everything about life was dark. I barely slept. I moved in a daze. I wanted to die every day. This terrible, impenetrable wall now separated me from ever having contact with my beloved brother again. How do you process that fact and integrate it into your life? I could not. And at the burial site, I wondered how I could possibly continue living after this. That was how I felt about losing my brother. But 3 days after my brother's funeral, Donnie came back to me while I was driving. And this was Wednesday, and I drove Donnie's personal truck to my grandparents' house that was located just outside of Bryan, which was our hometown. And, I was just taking some funeral plants and that sort of thing to my grandparents. I was by myself, as I said, and about halfway there, I had this strange thing begin happening to me. I suddenly developed 360-degree vision around me while I was driving. I could see everything around me. And at that moment, I also became aware of someone just behind me at my right shoulder. And then I saw that it was Donnie. And I could hear him speaking to me telepathically. And Donnie's body was made up of like a series of light points, but I could still tell definitely that it was him, without a doubt. And during this time, he told me not to be sad, that he was happy, and most of all, he wanted me to know what life was like for him now. And he explained to me that he was on what he called another plane of being, and that it had simply been time for him to leave. So at this point, I became aware that I was no longer in my body, but existed only in like a state of consciousness. And I was no longer aware of driving at all. And at that point, then it was sort of like I saw this landscape very briefly, which I could only describe as kind of like being outlines of something, like some trees and countryside. But after that, my experience focused on experiencing infinity and eternity. Throughout this entire experience, now my brother stayed with me. But I felt rather that, without a body restricting me anymore, I experienced that I was one with the universe and totally one with peace, with love and with all knowledge in the universe. And the phrase came to me of the peace that passeth understanding, which is a quote from the Bible. But the interesting thing was, I wasn't just thinking about these things like peace and love and knowledge. I actually, in this experience, became all of these. And I knew that everything and everyone is one with the spirit of universal love. That love is the all-encompassing, caring, and creative element of the universe. And I understood that there is no separation of anything from this all-encompassing spirit or God. And although I'm certain that my brother communicated other information to me, when I got back to my body, I could not recall all of it. And I think that was on purpose. I think that whatever my brother was telling me potentially could have related to things that were coming up in my life as I lived my life on Earth. But as I desired to be deeper in this experience, I just wanted to stay there. But suddenly I just began whooshing away very rapidly. I could hear this rushing sound. And within an instant, I felt my brother's hand or spirit, it's hard to describe, pushing down on my shoulder area associated with my physical form. It's the only way I know how to describe that. And my brother said very clearly to me, he said, "No, you can't go yet. It's not your time." And at that moment, very suddenly, with a feeling of a thud, I landed back in my physical body. Now, I could actually, as this was happening, I could actually see myself driving the truck that I had been in. And when I landed back in my body, coming through the roof, I realized that during that time I was out of body with my brother. I had actually made the turn onto another roadway that led to my grandparents' house. But, I don't remember doing any of that. And so I felt really happy the rest of the day. I went on to my grandparents' house. I wanted to try and tell them what I had experienced, but I knew that they wouldn't understand. My life, my consciousness, my view of life on Earth was never the same after that experience with my brother. My consciousness was completely changed. And from this experience, this is how I derived the title of my book, Driving into Infinity, Living with My Brother's Spirit, because essentially that is what happened to me while I was in the truck and then leaving my body and going into the universe with him. But I also discovered as time went on that I had what I call some after effects from this whole experience, being out of body with my brother, because immediately after my experience and after returning home to Houston and everything, I discovered that when people would walk into the room, sometimes I could hear what they were thinking. But that didn't last for too long. That just sort of happened here and there. And once in a while, I still have that. But, and the other thing that began happening, I noticed, was in the evening, if I were out taking a walk through the neighborhood, the street lights would come on. And I noticed that when I would walk by these street lights, the lights would go out. And as soon as I walked past them, then the lights would come back on these street lights. And the same thing would happen if I was driving somewhere, whether that was on a freeway or just a local street. because I could see it go out, and then as soon as I would drive past it, it would come back on. And I also learned to see auras, to see people's auras. Now, I don't just automatically see people's auras. You know, it generally has to be some sort of special case or special reason. Certain times, too, I've had like guidance, a voice of guidance come through to me. For example, a couple of months after my brother's death, it was wintertime, it was December, and my husband and I were staying at my dad's house, he and his wife. And of course, we were still grieving my brother, but it got really, really cold. And so the next morning, well, that night, actually, you know, we all went to bed and everything, but I knew there was something that was saying to me, there's something wrong in this house. And I had no idea what it was trying to tell me, but I had begun to feel really weak, like sick, but I knew that I had to get out of bed and do something. And I did get out of bed. I mean, my husband was asleep, but I literally crawled down the hallway of my dad's house to the front door. And I knew that I needed to open the front door and let fresh air in. And I got him up, and we discovered that on their furnace, the door had fallen off of the furnace. And so what was happening is it was taking all the oxygen from the house. And we were on the verge of dying from carbon monoxide poisoning. That I saved everybody in that house that night because I had this intuitive leading. And when I retired and I wrote this book, Driving into Infinity, Living with My Brother's Spirit, for the first time since I had that experience with my brother, I felt completely authentic as a person because I could finally own this part of my life and what I experienced. And so it was wonderful for me, again, being retired and having the time to write this book. I, like most people earlier in my life, you know, had this kind of fear related to death. I think it's kind of a common thing that happens with us. But after these experiences, I have absolutely no fear of death because honestly, it's just like taking the next step into this next life of consciousness and experiencing, I just want to say, like, life in a form of complete fullness, which is not what we get to experience here because we're enclosed in these bodies. But when we're in spirit, when we cross over, I mean, you get to experience this oneness, which is, there really aren't words to adequately describe that feeling of oneness, whether you call that with spirit, with God, with, you know, whatever, but you are that oneness with the consciousness that exists for everything. And there's no fear about that at all. It's just, you're all knowledge, you're all love, you're all peace. Now, you know, you have to keep in mind, it's not like I went on to the next level, I call it next level, where maybe people call it heaven or whatever. You know, I was out in the middle of the universe with my brother. Nevertheless, my consciousness was completely one with everything that I was experiencing. But I'm really looking forward to experience what comes next in our existence, I will say, because we certainly do go on after this existence.
I'll be the one by your side through the good and hard times when we're laughing. were hurting. I'll be the one that you